You are entering the Niliverse with your hosts Gustavo Kenya and Rodney Perry. This episode has been brought to you by the Society of Namecoin. No.
Well, good morning, Gustavo.
Morning, Rodney.
A lot of work here today. We are looking at this fifth section of the book. And we skipped over this section when we were coming through before, and because we want just to keep the thematic things kind of clear. One of the things that, as I said in this introduction to this section, is that we've spent a couple hundred pages in the book talking about nothing and nothingness, especially from various Eastern and Western religious perspectives and so forth. We have sort of conveniently ignored two of the grandest voices in European philosophy about the nature of nothing and nothingness, is Jean Paul Sartre and Friedrich Nietzsche. Now, we did that on purpose. It wasn't as though we just forgot, but it's much easier to understand where Sartre and Nietzsche are relative to nothing and nothingness if you've already established a certain sense of what the world's religions say about nothing and nothingness. Because Nietzsche especially, but both Nietzsche and Sartre, they use religions as their foil. And so if you have a sense of what the religions are saying, you get a sense of how their foil works a little better. We can now that we've come this far in the book, we can go and take a look at Sartre and Nietzsche. I'll particularly look at Sartre. Now, I just wanted to say that what I'm going to talk about today is, I'll only talk about this section as it is directly relevant to how the pops use the existentialism of Sartre and the nihilism of Nietzsche. There's so much in this section, and again, I've said it many times, this is a section that really should be read and contemplated. The research is quite extensive. And I won't go in at all to a couple of the larger interpretive areas that we went into in the book. And one of them, which I truly enjoyed, was that a very sharp heuristic tool for understanding Sartre is to see that he was a victim of vertigo, suffered from the physical ailment of vertigo. And now, I wasn't in graduate school or so forth trained in Western philosophy, and so I introduced myself over the years by myself to these people. And I had about, I don't even know now, 10, 20 years ago, quite a brutal experience with vertigo myself. And so for about a year, I had quite bad vertigo. And I've now no longer have that because I have a kind of physical therapy that has retrained my brain and so forth. Luckily, I had vertigo in the 21st century, not the 19th century.
Right.
Anyway, once you see the various physical symptoms of vertigo, it's quite clear that Sartre suffered from vertigo and that he philosophized it. He made it into, when he talks about the basic experience of life being one of nausea. It's nauseating to be alive. And he says that because we don't have any guidance in life, we have to guide ourselves, that we become anxious. He calls it angst, or something, anguish. And that angst, that anxiety, and that nausea are quite clearly came from his personal experience with vertigo. But anyway.
The feeling of vertigo, that was your insight. That was your observation.
There was some evidence. He was hospitalized on a Russian trip. There were some times where he couldn't walk properly and so forth. So I went and looked and found some actual research about that, not just that I kind of imputed it from his philosophy. Also, there's a really interesting, now that I'm talking about what I said I wouldn't talk about, but there's a really interesting area here that Sartre totally denied his body. He totally denied any of the physical wisdom from his body. He was in horrible physical shape. He took drugs, he smoked, he drank, never went to the dentist and so forth. So he's an interesting character. I said all that to say I'm not going to talk about that. Okay. So anyway, I'm going to try to bring out just the things about existentialism that clearly show themselves in the writing of the popularizers of science. And I should read, just to say again, as we've said many times, while the popularizers of science, they vehemently deny that they're doing philosophy. However, if you just read their books, you'll see that they, especially in the field, in the area of existentialism, they are speaking very directly and obviously an existential philosophy toward life. And we'll see, that's what I'm going to just try to talk about today, why it is that we say that. So that's sort of where we're going. Let's just start it just quickly. The existentialists, Sartre and Nietzsche, who you will talk about, they get right to the heart of the matter, and they go right to the heart of, and they deny the existence of God. They do it very clearly, deny the existence of God, saying God that doesn't exist. So in, Sartre's magnum opus, his big work, Being and Nothingness, I should just mention that you originally liked the title of our book, Nothing and Nothingness, because it was an echo, hearkening back to Being and Nothingness.
Absolutely.
And just if we took the titles, we would see that our different views of what nothing and nothingness are. So Being and Nothingness. And he said that people throughout history, this is Sartre now, Sartre is early 20th century. I think he died in 60 or so. I remember him being around a little bit. In Being and Nothingness, he said that people have always believed in these kind of transcendental, extrasensory, transsensory beings, gods, and realities beyond the senses and so forth. And he says this, but if we once get away from the illusion of worlds behind the scene, if we get, that's an illusion to him, worlds behind the scene. He says, then the appearances become full positivity. Its essence is an appearing, which no longer is opposed to being, but on the contrary is the measure of it. For the being of an existent is exactly what it appears. That which you can experience in the senses, that's it. That is the essence of humanity, the essence of life. There are no, as he says, worlds behind the scenes. That's the main reason why people like Sartre are called phenomenologists. It's the phenomenon that is the reality. And it is phenomenon that is the truth of existence. It's not that there's real existence beyond me or transcendental realm, and that what's happening here is somehow less than the true existence. But what we have in the world is the true existence, nothing beyond. And he says, so Sartre, they not only, Sartre as well as Nietzsche, not only did these very sort of academic, well-argued well-argued stances about the God not being real, they also were kind of satirical and mean in many ways about the existence of God and those who believed in God. So in our work, and I'm going to quote Nietzsche here because it's more to the point, but in a work called Ecce Homo, How One Becomes What One Is, Nietzsche said that, he quotes this French fiction writer Stendhal, and he said, God's only excuse is that he does not exist. Great line, I think. He's kind of sassy, God, the only excuse God has is that he isn't real. So they go straight to the point. No God, no extra phenomenal realities whatsoever. No what we call metaphysics. They aren't metaphysicians. They're talking about the nature, especially Sartre now, the nature of existence as we see it, existentialism. So Sartre is not quite as pointed and edgy toward the existence of God as Nietzsche is. And I just want to mention just one famous speech he gave called Existentialism is Humanism. And later on, he kind of rused the fact that he gave this speech. And I think he did it because it was so clear. He said his thing so clearly in this speech, whereas Sartre is famous for using words in all kinds of different ways and being very difficult to follow, lying oftentimes about other philosophers, physicians, and so forth. In this, he says things that are quite clear. Existentialism as humanism. So basically what he says is existentialism is not going to waste its time trying to prove that there is no God. And he says he says the real problem for people of Europe is to rediscover their true nature, meaning that we aren't going to waste our time disproving that God, because God is in fact irrelevant. God is irrelevant, and we aren't going to waste our time trying to disprove his existence. And so I wanted to point that out about God being irrelevant, not taking the time to disprove God's existence, because it is the exact language that Lawrence Krauss uses about God. He says, I will not take time to prove the existence or non-existence of God because God is irrelevant. Now, Lawrence Krauss is one of the first to say that he does not use philosophy. He could have quoted word for word this language from existentialism is humanism, and it would have set very well in his books. So that's one of our points, that popularizers of science actually use existential thinking. They are existential philosophers, all the while denying it. So here's another point. In that God doesn't exist, for Nietzsche, that God is dead, this famous phrase that God is dead. And for Sartre, it's more that God is beside the point. Both of them, you'll talk about Nietzsche and the human being, but for Sartre, he's saying that because God is dead, then there is an enhanced role for human beings in existence. One of the things he said in one of his notebooks for ethics he says that human beings are the heir of the mission of the dead God. Oh, wow. That's a big statement. Very big statement. Human beings are going to take on the mission that God used to take in the world of human beings and so forth. And so this mission, according to Sartre, was to find meaning in a world without a God. That's the human goal, the human endeavor, to find meaning in a world that has no God. Now, you can take that phrase, and Michio Kaku, one of the most popular of popularizers, says that straight out, that God is not in the world. It is our job to find meaning in it. And of course, Stephen Hawking is also saying the same thing. He said that when he was saying that when we understand the world, we understand the mind of God. So human beings are taking on the role that God used to have. Very interesting sort of direct relationship between Sartre's existentialism and the popularizers of science, all the while they deny that that is there. So for existentialism, there are no behind-the-scenes worlds. There's no reality hidden anywhere. There's no metaphysical world. There's no, as we talked about, the trans-psychic world. There is no such thing for existentialists. There is no nothing. For Sartre, there is no nothing. There is only the phenomenal world. There's only this world that we have here. One of the reasons we are looking at this is we're looking at these various uses of the word nothing and nothingness. So let's go just one more, take a little bit of a look. Because there is no trans-psychic, because there is no metaphysical world, we know where the realm of nothing is for Sartre. It's not in the realm of the metaphysical. It's not in the realm of the trans-psychic. It's not in the realm of the divine. He says, he borrows this phrase from Heidegger. He fights a lot with Heidegger and so forth, but he says, there is the world, and outside of that, nothing. Now, very interesting. If you remember our growth of the meaning of the word nothing in the book, if you were to read this phrase, there is the world, and outside of that, nothing. If you read to that phrase and as a normal educated reader in the Western world today, it would mean that we have this phenomenal world, and outside of that, there is, in fact, nothing. In our way of looking at the world, it is the world, and then outside of the world, there is this stated thing, nothing. Yeah. It has a declarative quality. He's giving it the opposite quality. So for Sartre, there is no nothing. There is no nothing. It does not exist. And so again, you could say that one of the more, you might say more philosophical ways of saying that, for Sartre, there is no metaphysical.
There is not anything. Remember, going back to the types of nothing, he's employing without being honest about it, he's employing the philosophical nothing, which was, if we remember correctly, it was not anything at all.
Not anything at all. That's right. Yeah, thanks. That's good. I always forget I should refer to your 6 categories, because that keeps the language.
The problem is, what we want to do is be precise about which nothing we're speaking of, so we don't confuse one another, right? Right, Sartre? So yes. It's not anything at all versus ours, a declaratives.
A declarative, right? Very good. And metaphorically within our book, we could say that for Sartre, there is no over the cliff edge. Actually, we go into quite a bit of discussion of, because he uses the cliff edge metaphor, and he uses it in the exact opposite way that we do. For Sartre, there is no over the cliff edge, whereas we talk about coming to the cliff edge with heuristics, which allows you to move on beyond the cliff edge and so forth. So Hazel Barnes is a translator, one of the famous translators of Being and Nothingness. And she writes a really nice introduction, a very good interpretation of the introduction. This is Sartre's big book. So she says this: for Sartre, acceptance of one's absolute freedom is the only existence, commensurate with an honest desire to exist as fully as a man. But the recognition comes not in ecstasy, but in anguish. It is not a merging with a higher power, but a realization of one's isolation. So she's saying about Sartre is that we are absolutely free in the world. We aren't guided by a God. There is no metaphysical guidance. We are absolutely free in the world. However, that freedom is very much anxiety producing because we have to make our lives what they are. There's nothing given to us at birth. We are born into life and we need to make life. We need to make meaning out of our life through our choices that we make in life. This is exactly parallel to the position of the popularizers of science. So popularizers of science say that we are in the world and we're utterly free to make our own meaning. And that is, again, a use of an existentialist approach to living. So one more thing. Sartre's famous for saying this thing: existence precedes essence, which is an exact flip from what the religious people of Western Europe were saying at the time, because they were saying you have an essence, you have a spiritual essence, which is then manifest in the world as existence. Sartre says no. You come into the world without any essence whatsoever. You exist first, and you create your own essence. Words again from what the religions of the day were saying. Existence precedes. This is a very strong statement. Existence precedes essence.
But implicit in that existence precedes essence is that existence is material. We exist first materially, right? And then we build all this fluff, or this purpose and reason of being, right? After we developed ourselves materially, right? We get to a certain point, certain level of maturity, and we can then build our own purpose. But first, we exist materially. Hydrocarbons.
Yeah, stardust, as they say. So let me just quote one more thing from his speech. His existentialism is humanism. Is a humanism is how it's translated in English. And he says this: what do we mean by saying that existence precedes essence? We mean that man, first of all, exists, encounters himself, surges up in the world, and afterward defines himself. So we define who we are after we're born, and it's our job to define who we are. He says, thus there is no human nature. There's no essential human nature. We create our own lives because there's no God to have a concept. He says, man simply is. And he says, and he wills to be after that leap towards existence. Man is nothing else but that which he makes of himself. That is the first principle of existentialism. Human beings are what we make ourselves to be. So I just want to sort of wrap this all up. So human beings are aware that they exist for no particular reason. They're kind of happenstance. He often uses this de trop, superfluous. We're superfluous in the world. And that's, again, a position that popularizers of science often, that we are an accident in the world. We aren't here for a particular reason. The human being is sort of beside the point and merely a happenstance in the universe. This particular position on the world is often put forth by various popularizers of science. Neil deGrasse Tyson, for once, says that we are a sort of quirky arising, that we are happenstance in the universe. You'll see this language happen all the time among the popularizers of science. The point I'm just trying to make is a simple one. The existentialism of Jean Paul Sartre is directly and obviously embodied in the philosophical relationship of the popularizers to the world, and we're just pointing that out.
And let me continue with that, because it seems like existentialism and nihilism sort of go hand in hand, right? And how so? Well, existentialism is defined by kind of like build your own purpose and make your own adventure. Nihilism is the part where there is initially no purpose, no morality, no God. The way I sort of see that is that the existentialists could be sort of a nihilist, but not necessarily so, right? Say someone like Kierkegaard, you wouldn't consider a nihilist. The nihilist must necessarily be an existentialist, right? Because if you have no purpose, you have to build your own, or else just blow your brains out, because what's the point, right? Like you have to build your own. What we're going to do now is jump straight into the hop on pop session and pick on our favorite pop, Lawrence Krauss, where he introduces for us existentialist nihilism and how it's at the root of all atheistic non-belief. Necessarily so, right? So if you're an atheist, you must be an essentialist nihilism. You must be. Okay. Let's just see how intellectually vacuous such a position is. Okay. All right. So here we go.
I have a friend of mine who's a very famous writer, and I'll leave him nameless for the moment, but he writes very dark novels. And when I first met him, I was surprised he was so cheerful. And I said, how can he be so cheerful? And he looked at me and he said, I'm a pessimist, but that's no reason to be gloomy. And that's become my own mantra in some sense. And it seems particularly appropriate when you think about the universe, because the universe, first of all, isn't here to make us happy. It isn't here to please us. And it doesn't give a damn what happens to us. And the far future of the universe is likely to be miserable, as I talked about in my last book, and I point out my new book could even be more miserable. So in a purposeless universe that may have a miserable future, you may wonder, well, how can I go about each day? And the answer is, we make our own purpose. We make our own joy. We are here by a cosmic accident, as I've tried to show, but it's a remarkable accident that's allowed you and I to be here to talk, us to think and appreciate the beauty and splendor of the universe. So the fact that the universe itself may have no purpose doesn't affect our purpose. In fact, it's the incredible height of solipsism to assume that without us, the universe doesn't matter, and that if the universe is purposeless, we don't matter. We make our own purpose. And it seems to me life is more precious because it's temporary and accidental, and we should take advantage of that. And we have evolved brains. And that allows us to ask questions not just about how the universe works, but how we should behave. Now, it's a long philosophical debate about whether you can get aught from is. And maybe you can never get aught from is, and maybe reason is the slave of passion. But one thing seems clear to me, that without knowing what is, you can never get to ought. Or if you do, the ought that you get to is silly. If you don't know the consequences of your actions, which is really what science tells us, then you can't assess how to behave. And so understanding empirical phenomena plays a central role in leading a better life, it seems to me. And it should play a central role in public policy so that we as a society can make sound decisions about how to act in the common good.
Hey, there we go.
Yeah.
Lawrence imparting some wisdom. Let me back up what I meant when I said intellectually vacuous, and point out a couple of things that were said here in the video. I'll quote him here and say, he mentions how, imagine like the height of solipsism, right? That without us, the universe doesn't matter. But according to the nihilist, the universe itself shouldn't matter. It passes away too in a heat death. So so the universe shouldn't matter either. And so nothing matters, not even the universe, the object of your study as well. He also says more precious, that life is in somehow more precious because it's temporary and accidental. And yet doesn't give us any reason how, or explanation as to how that could possibly be. Is it theories, are scientific theories that are temporary and accidental better than ones that are absolute or far-reaching? Absolutely not. So where's the consistency there? Right. So what are you talking about like temporary and accidental being more precious? How does that make any sense? He also says, if you don't know what is, you shouldn't be able to hold to what ought to be. Yeah, I can agree with that, but that's the very thing that we're trying to sort of peel away at. The atheistic scientist holds that the only things that are real are physical in nature. What we can build theories around and conform through measurement. But that's just it. We're saying that there's more than that. So when you talk about we shouldn't be able to say ought before is, knowing what is, well, that's what we're trying to figure out. What are the real things, the nut of our debate? So you haven't, by saying this about like sort of knowing what is before you can be able to say what ought, that's the nut of our disagreement. So having said that, let's take the opportunity to employ a chaoptic. Remember what a chaoptic was, an extended metaphor with the purpose of informing further investigation to help us understand what's going on here, right? And I call it the Ptolemaic model of being.
All right.
All right, the sphere of experience. Remember the Ptolemaic model with the Earth at the center and then planets sort of going around the Earth in epicycles. We start with the Earth at the center of the universe. The Earth represents being, or what's ultimately real in the grandest sense.
Okay.
Forget the fact that it's a massive body. Just imagine that it's the center of the universe. So our conscious selves simply don't exist on Earth. All conscious beings reside at the circumference of the circle, or what Ptolemy called the deferent, the most macroscopic governing orbit of our lives. Self that we endlessly try to get to know as we advance in life is the planet before our being, or the lowercase being is the center of the epicycle. The uppercase or the capital letter being is the Earth. So we're trying to get to know our lowercase being in front of a relatively fixed background of physical things and events, which are the stars. So the mind's eye, so to speak, is the center of the epicycle. We see ourselves, which is the planet, against a background of stars, which is basically the physical things and events that the universe, that are going on in the universe. So we have a sense of a unifying force at the center of the universe. And the nothingness of being is that for us. It's an object of purpose. Remember, nothingness is an object, right? It's something that, at least a mental object. Remember, nothingness is like an emptiness, right? That I can sort of picture and sort of argue again, like, so the universe comes from nothing. The only way that can make sense is if I make nothing something in that, an empty bubble. So it's an object, a mental object. In this sense, the unifying force at the center of the universe, if we're to visualize it this way, right, is the object of purpose for us. We experience the world along the deferent, provided we don't stop to think that we can orbit without falling. The problem is that it's difficult to do that. Like it's unwise to try to get through life without thinking, essentially, right? Because eventually doubt will kind of smack you upside the head. And without proper mental training, you're going to fall. I liken this to Wile E. Coyote. Remember, the Warner Brothers sort of cartoons when he's chasing the Roadrunner right off of a cliff. You need to distract yourself from not just the reality of the things around you, being the reality of the space that's been dressed around you, but also the abyss beneath you.
The abyss below.
So don't look down to wake from your meeting with nothing, right? To be made aware of the nothingness. You continue to reach out to the Roadrunner. And as the object of your affection, the Roadrunner is the object of your affection, that vital force is within arm's length. You'll be fine. As long as you just look straight at the Roadrunner and he's the object of your affection, you're not going to fall. As soon as you stop and doubt and you look down, that's when you fall.
That's when you fall.
So you have to sort of continue towards that object of affection. But that's difficult if all you do is focus on the phenomenal world. You have to exercise the mind too. So here we enter Nietzsche, the call of no purpose, no morality, no God. In the face of such truth, and I use that in quotation marks, people must fill the void with something. The world of appearances or experience in this slide is not good enough or able to easily, this bubble, I guess, is easily popped by doubt. So enter the world of the overman or the Ubermensch. Become your own God, Lord of your own creation. Right. Not the one where you exist as part of a whole. You are, the whole. That you are all that there is. Things themselves are a reflection of you in some as a yet undiscovered way. So that's in the next slide here. Once the purpose or meaning of humanity and being have been disposed of, the nihilist hardens his self around a new deferent. So there's a deferent above the one below of experience and elevates the physical world as the only thing of consequence. The overman makes the deferent a concrete thing. He makes that bubble, he hardens that bubble. And no longer can the overman, a consequence of that is that no longer can the overman look to the center of the universe where ultimate being resides. The overman can only look out tangentially to the stars along the concrete path that he's laid out for himself. Yes, he has firm ground to stand on. Doubt doesn't easily shake his ground. Like, it's very difficult to quake his ground, but he can only look out tangentially, as this diagram illustrates.
Right.
He can no longer look in through the center towards somewhere else, to somewhere along the circumference of the circle. The thing to remember here is that without a theological nothing, there is no way of resolving the union of everything and nothing. The question being, does everything include nothing? Is nothing part of everything? Well, if not, how can everything be the most universal concept? What we need to do is, how do we resolve this idea of there having to include both everything and nothing, right? Nothing is not a part of everything. Then everything itself, the concept of everything, is not the most universal or the largest, the biggest thing that there is.
Because it doesn't include nothing.
It doesn't include nothing. So my personal opinion is that being and non-being mutually annihilate one another to, for lack of a better word, God. Okay, so being and non-being, being and nothing will annihilate each other. So we will annihilate each other. We will be annihilated properly if we come in contact with God. This is not a stretch for a scientist. The scientist is fully aware that when an electron, a physical thing, comes in contact with a positron, you can say it's also a physical thing, but not a massive. It's kind of like a hole. A positron is like a hole in space. So if an electron comes in contact with a positron, they are both annihilated too, and what you're left with is energy. So this part of the metaphor is something that could be very, very easily understood by a scientist. Right. What we need to do in some way is, in the case of self, in the case of yourself, you need to find or become a anti-self in a way. What I consider instead of a person for yourself, a person for others, in order to become nothing, in order to be annihilated and come in contact with God. So the self, when brought into contact with the anti-self, will become nothing, annihilated, and reach God, I guess, the state of God. The overman, Nietzsche's overman, is not this anti-self. The overman is an uber self. Remember, as in the Ptolemaic model of being, it's a deferent above the sphere of experience, right? Above the pleb, or I think what Nietzsche calls the Untergang, the lower beings that can only experience the phenomenal world, and that really can't reason beyond the sensation. They're slaves to sensation. The overman is no longer such a slave. He's an elevated sense of self, as such, in no way desiring to annihilate that very self that it took so much time to elevate. So he doesn't want to become annihilated. He's above it all. He feels confident in his position as being an overman above the rest of us, so has no desire to annihilate his self. He's worked so hard to get to where he is. Overman, above man. Just like a little bit of a recap. The nothingness of being is the object of purpose, and this is not a bad thing. The purpose that we build for ourselves as existentialism is not necessarily bad. We're going to build purpose for our life, our career, right? That's something that choose. It's not. I don't imagine my career being any universal of having any universal significance. But there are some certain things that happen within that sphere that I deem to be important and gives my life meaning. That part of existentialism is good, or that going that far. But we're still left with the void of like an absolute purpose. So the nothingness of being is the object of our purpose. Nothing but being, or after that bubble pops, is the being at one with all. The bubble pops, think like the anti-self being like a prick, a pin prick, right? Topping that bubble, and so there's no longer a center. There's no longer circumference. It's just nothing. There's nothing left. For an overman, you can't just have a pinprick anymore. It's a shame, right? But no longer will a pinprick just do it for you, right? You're going to need a hammer to smash that concrete. Okay, it can happen. You're going to have it'll be harder to find that the anti-self, but it's out there, and that's all I have to say about.
Well, that's all really good. I mean, the Ubermensch is, and you can think, as you're saying, it's inflation utter inflation, and it can't just be picked now because it's so important and so forth.
It's actually concrete. What we base our existence on is the physical world. That's the essence of being, is it material. And,
that's right.
Well, the atheistic scientists would all agree on with that.
That's right.
And so I guess the point here is that if you're an atheist, you must be subscribed to existentialist nihilism. You must.
Right. Very good. In fact, they do.
and you'll see it again and again with these videos that we pull out for the hop on pop sessions.
That's right.
Those that consider themselves atheists, their words are clearly saying that they're existentialists, nihilists, all of them.
That's right.
Just as this video has said, there is no purpose. Life is precious because it's temporary and accidental. You've laid it out for us. So now we know how to attack is too strong of a word. We know where to direct our argumentation. We know all atheists, right, must be existential nihilists. So let's work with that.
And that's a great way of doing it. It sort of puts them in the vice of reason that they have to be these things. Well, we know they are. We know they are. And I mean, in terms of the Ubermensch, the over person, yeah, I mean, there's so much there. Nietzsche had this amazing world of vertical hierarchy. The Untergang, those who go below, then there were the Hören, the higher people, of those as the intellects, the people who have an intellectual understanding of life. And then there is the Ubermensch, which is rare, and at least there was one of them, and that was Nietzsche.
Right.
And that Ubermensch bringing the solutions to the, he talks a lot about, he's up in some rare mountaintop, and then he'll come down and talk to the Untergang, and then he goes back up to the mountaintop and then comes back down to bring the knowledge to the Untergang, those who are going below. So he had a very vertical image of the world. And it's interesting in that you undermined the Ubermensch by bringing a spherical view of the world with your diagrams and so forth, which is interesting, the vertical being undermined by the spherical, which is an interesting notion. And I think it's a way of taking your image there and kind of just keeping it as an image, the opposition of the vertical and the spherical. Very interesting. I never thought of it that way.
The funny thing is that, all these popularizers, right, consider them secretly, would never come out and say it. They could probably consider themselves, those familiar with Nietzsche, would consider themselves Ubermensch. Right?
Yes, they do.
But at best, they are the Hören. At best.
That's right. They are Hören. Right. Exactly. Yeah. So the chaotic really worked well in that case. I had never, that's great. The thing about the vertical and the spherical. And yes, they do. I mean, it's we point out quite a few. Lisa Randall, who says, we have the hubris as physicists to think that we're going to solve all the questions of the universe. Right. As a physicist. Michio Kaku says very clearly that he is an Ubermensch, and that he is bringing down to the world his understanding and so forth. So it's another very... Oh
yeah, I think he said something like from his 11th dimensional mind's eye, like that he can see in 11 dimensions. He's going to bring it down to us in 3 dimensions. And
yes,
easily digestible.
I remember looking at that YouTube talk, and he was talking about the 11 dimensions needed for string theory and the unified theory of the universe. And he sort of mistakenly, I don't think he wanted to or he planned to, but he's sort of like, he couldn't help it. He made himself 11 dimensional.
Yes, yeah.
In bringing it down. I thought that too. I wonder if when he saw that again, he said, oh my God, I didn't want to say that.
Shakes his head, oh man, yeah.
I did it, didn't I? I outed my Ubermensch.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. He outed himself. Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks. See you next week.
Next week.
Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Entering the Universe has been brought to you by the Society of Namecoin. Until next time. No.